A very good afternoon to all the students of class 12. Today I'm going to take up the lesson The Interview, written by Christopher Sylvester. Well, before we begin the lesson, just a little bit of an update that all of you, of course, know what is an interview. Um, it is an official face-to-face meeting of important figures with the interviewer and who asks various questions. And of course, in today's world, it can also be conducted over the telephone. And of course, we have job interviews and all other kinds of interviews also. Now, the difference between an interview and a conference is a conversation or a discussion that is an interchange of views, and many people can participate in that. Then we also have the terminology press conference, so which we all are aware in today, and all news channels we do come across press conferences, especially the political kinds that we see. And a press conference is a formalized event where the persons present their viewpoint on some pressing issues, some important issues, such as any government regulations, or there are some major observations, or a new product or market trend that is there. And of course, in the movie world also, we have promotion of movies, etc. So, and recently we've had so many press conferences during this pandemic where the finance minister has called for various, press conferences and has given, or shared with the public what packages they're giving and what kind of help is being extended to all the people during this. So, these are three different things, and an interview is, face-to-face kind between an interviewer and an interviewee. The person taking the interview is interviewer, and the person giving the interview is the interviewee. Okay. Now, as is given in your textbooks, Christopher Sylvester was a student of history at Peterhouse, Cambridge. He was a reporter for Private Eye for 10 years and has written features for Vanity Fair. Now, here I would just like to enlighten you a little bit, since, they've not written much about the Vanity Fair, but as GK or as additional knowledge, Vanity Fair, it is a monthly periodical or a monthly magazine of popular culture, fashion, and current affairs, published by Condé Nast in the US. Now, this was an American publisher, an entrepreneur, and a business magnate. He founded the Condé Nast, and which was a mass media company. And it is this company that publishes this Vanity Fair, this magazine. And the first version of Vanity Fair was published from 1913 to 1936. And then the imprint was revived in 1983 and currently includes 5 international editions of the magazine. This magazine has earned a reputation for lively writing, in depth, for reporting, and insightful social commentaries. So that was a little bit of information on Vanity Fair. Now, this chapter has been taken or is an excerpt from the introduction to the Penguin Books of Interviews, an anthology from 1859 to the present. It contains the interviews taken of various celebrities and important writers and people, eminent people, and they have been published in this book. Now, the style of writing for this chapter is that it has been divided into 2 parts. Part 1 talks about the various views that people have given on interviews. Like, some positive, some people were very positive about interviews, and some people were categorically very, very negative about interviews and condemned interviews. Then the second part is an interview taken by Padmanabhan, and the interview was for Umberto Eco. and who was a writer of fiction and non-fiction, an Italian novelist, okay, and writer. Okay, so we begin the lesson now that the interview is an invention of a little over 130 years, but today it has become a very, very common feature. Everybody likes to give interviews, and they want people to know about themselves, or they want to let people know about things that are happening, and we come to know about all contemporaries, contemporary people, their lifestyle, and we get an insight into their lives also. So interviews have become a very, very common feature of journalism today. And everybody, who's literate will have read an interview at some point of time. And these days, with these networking sites and everything, and that we have all the YouTubes and things, they are full of these kinds of interviews that have been taken, and they keep a record of it. Okay, now this part tells us that uh, you know some of them have liked the idea of an interview, and they feel that that it is a source of truth, that when you interview a person you come to know the truth, while some people feel that interview, or taking interviews and giving interviews is a kind of an art. But there are certain people who condemn interviews, and they despise or loathe, Loathe. They despise, they loathe, they detest, they abhor. So I've given you so many synonyms for this word, okay? So despise, hate, loathe, abhor, detest, interviews, as they feel that these interviews are an unwarranted intrusion into the lives of the people whose interview is being taken, because everyone has a personal life of their own. But when you sit down for an interview, you can be asked questions from all angles. They may be about your public life, and they can also be about your private life too. So it's a little shaky grounds. Okay, so as I told you, the chapter has been divided into two parts, and the first part deals with the various views of different people about the interview, and the second part reproduces an interview of an Italian writer, Umberto Eco, by Mukund Padmanabhan from the Hindu. Okay. Now, in this, they have taken, or the writer has given examples of various people, okay? The opinions of various writers. And the first, some might make quite extravagant claims for it being in the highest form a source of truth, and in its practice an art. And others, usually celebrities, so some of these celebrities or these eminent people, they feel that they are victims, that they are attacked and they are victims. And they hate or despise the interview as an unwarranted intrusion into their lives, okay? Like in some of the primitive cultures, old cultures, ancient times, it was believed, that anybody whose interview was taken or whose photograph was taken, that they actually lost their soul. A part of them was lost. So they lost their soul, because we all have our inner selves, There's something that, we do not share with everybody, So a part of your soul going in, a part of your real personal life going out. So they believed that, the soul was taken away by the interviewer. Okay. If a photograph or a portrait of somebody, then it was stealing one's soul. Now we come on to these various celebrities that they're talking about. The first one they had taken is V.S. Naipaul. He feels that some people are wounded by interviews, and they lose a part of themselves, or they lose their souls. Now, V.S. Naipaul, we must know and add to our knowledge, it's given in your book, he's known as a cosmopolitan writer, and in his travel books and in all his documentaries, he's written about, he's given impressions of the country, of his ancestors, that is India, okay, and he received the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2001. Basically, V.S. Naipaul was a Trinidad and Tobago born British writer of fiction and non-fiction in English. So he also received the Booker Prize, the Nobel Prize in Literature, and the Jerusalem Prize for the freedom of the individual in society, written by him. Okay, so V.S. Naipaul was also against these interviews. Then we come on to another famous writer, and you're all very well acquainted with Lewis Carroll, who's the creator of Alice in Wonderland. You know, it's a fantasy fiction. And if you remember from your childhood days, Alice falls through a rabbit hole and she enters a subterranean a fantasy world, and she comes across peculiar creatures like the Mad Hatter, the Cheshire Cat, the Queen of Hearts, and then the March Hare, then the Dormouse and Dodo, etc. So, according to Lewis Carroll, who is the creator of Alice in Wonderland, he was also very much against these interviews, and he found it horrifying, that it's a horror, you know, and it's horrifying, a very unpleasant, a very nasty experience, that he never consented, he never agreed to be interviewed. And what was this horror about? What was this fear or maybe horror that he condemned interviews? He felt that, you know, sometimes a person may be a very down to earth person, but these interviews and these things, they, they treat you as a big celebrity, you know, as a famous celebrity. And the way, I mean, you know, so he was very much against flattery. He did not like people to, you know, brag too much or to, you know, magnify things on a very large scale. So that is why he was against these interviews. He was against being lionized, you know, treating as a celebrity, which made him thus, he was against it and repelled it, you know. So he would repel these interviewers. Repel means to send them back, not entertain them, drive them away. Any acquaintances, any interviewers, and persistent petitioners or people who requested for his autographs. So he was against interviews and he was also against autographs. Okay. And he would afterwards relate the stories of his success in silencing all such people with much satisfaction and amusement. So he also, like V.S. Naipaul, Lewis Carroll also condemned interviews and autographs also. Okay, then we come on to the next eminent personality that they have taken is Rudyard Kipling. Okay, you're again very familiar with this name because of Jungle Book. Okay. Now, he was an English journalist, a short story writer, poet, and novelist. He was born in India. That is why, you know, the background of India is taken in his stories. And he was born in India, and then he was, very much in favor of all the building up a background of the Indian scenario. Okay. He expressed an even more condemnatory attitude towards the interviewer. He also condemned interviews. He was totally against these interviews. And his wife, Caroline, used to maintain a daily diary. So, like the diary entry, you know. So, one diary entry of hers has brought to the fore that she has mentioned on 14th October 1892 that their day was completely ruined, wrecked and spoiled by these two interviewers who had come from Boston, a place in US. Okay, so their day was completely wrecked. And she reports her husband as saying to the reporters, "Why do I refuse to be interviewed? Because it is immoral." Immoral means unethical. Unethical, and it is a crime. It is an offense. So we've come across V.S. Naipaul, okay, who said that, you know, it takes away a part of you only. Then we come across Lewis Carroll, who says that it's a horrifying experience because they magnify you, they make you larger than life kind of a thing, and he was against any kind of flattery and being lionized. So he was against interviews, and he was also against autographs also. Then we come across Rudyard Kipling also. He was also very much against it, and his wife has also mentioned that how their day was ruined and spoilt by these journalists because Rudyard Kipling and his wife felt that interviews were immoral and they were a crime. Okay, then we come on to the next person that they have taken. And okay, so then Kipling also says that it is a cowardly and vile, and no respectable man would ask much and less give it. But then there was a little deviation here in Kipling's statement. Yet Kipling had himself perpetrated such an assault on Mark Twain only a few years before. He had interviewed Mark Twain. Now, Mark Twain is a famous writer, and his actual name was Samuel Langhorne Clemens, and he was an American writer. Then we come across another writer they had taken, H.G. Wells. And it's given in the footnote over here. One name is very familiar. It was a part of the CBSE syllabus for class 12. The novel, The Invisible Man, okay, written by H.G. Wells. The full form of H.G. is Herbert George Wells. And he was an English writer, prolific in many genres. And his lifespan was from 1866 to 1946 in UK. H.G. Wells, in an interview in 1894, referred to the interviewing ordeal. So H.G. Wells also felt that the interview was an ordeal. Ordeal means it was a trial, it was, troublesome, it was unpleasant, okay? But then he also deviated, a fairly frequent interviewee, and 40 years later found himself interviewing Joseph Stalin, okay? So initially he had condemned it, and later on, he himself, started taking interviews of other people. And they have mentioned over here Joseph Stalin. Okay. Now, Joseph Stalin, you must know a little bit about these people. Joseph Stalin, he was a Georgian revolutionary and Soviet politician who led the Soviet Union from mid-1920 till 1953 as the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. He was born in Georgia on 18 December 1858 and he died on March 5th, 1953. So a great celebrity, a great eminent political figure. So he himself had interviewed Joseph Stalin. Then we come on to the next eminent person they have taken, Saul Bellow. Okay. Now, Saul Bellow, he was a Canadian-American writer. Okay. He was a Canadian-American writer. Okay. Then we come on to who has consented to be interviewed on several occasions, nevertheless once described interviews as being like thumbprints on his windpipe. Thumbprints, when you're trying to strangle somebody, when you're trying to choke somebody, so your thumb comes here, and that is how people, they actually get killed. So thumbprints on the windpipe means so suffocating, and unbearable, so much of pressure, so much of stress building up when the interview is going on and when the interviewer is asking the all those kinds of questions. So Saul Bellow felt that they were like thumbprints on his windpipe. But despite all these drawbacks, and some people have condemned, but they still hold a lot of importance, these interviews, and they're considered to be supremely serviceable medium of communication. Because through these interviews, the people around come to know about these celebrities or about these people or about any general information that is required. And these days, it is becoming very, very popular, a very popular medium, okay? And whatever we want to know about our contemporaries is people living at the same time. So we come to know a lot. We, develop quite vivid impressions of our contemporaries through these interviews. Now, Dennis Bryan has written almost everything of moment reaches us through one man asking questions of another. So, whatever said and done, whether it is, an immoral act considered by, or a crime considered, or it takes your soul away, or whatever it is, in today's world, the interview has taken a higher position and a better position, okay? And in today's scenario, the interviewer, the person taking the interview, has great liberty, has great freedom to ask all those questions. So he holds a position of unprecedented power, of power and influence. So, they can be a kind of a check on various government policies or various politicians, because they have every right, because it is an autonomous body, so to speak, an independent body, so to speak, media. So they can put forth any kind of questions and seek answers for the welfare of the public, for the public to know. So in a way, they are supposed to act as a kind of a check on all these political people or their political whatever policies are there. Okay, so with that we come to the end of the first part. So it talks about basically, how what those people in those days felt about these interviews. Okay, but despite all this, it is a very, very popular form today, and in today's journalism, it holds a very, very prestigious position, the interview. Okay. Now we come on to the second part, and this is an interview taken by Mukund Padmanabhan of Umberto Eco, who an Italian novelist, literary critic, and philosopher. Okay, and he was also a semiotician and a university professor. Now, this interview that goes on, Padmanabhan, and his lifespan was from 1932 to 216. Now, Mukund has asked him various questions, and Umberto was basically, he was very popular as a novelist, though through the course of the interview, we come to know that he was not so much of a novelist as much as a writer of fiction and non-fiction. So a great deal about the life of Umberto Eco is disclosed through this interview. Okay, so what does he write all about? And he has a very good reputation as a scholar for his ideas on semiotics. Semiotics is the study of signs and symbols and their use, which is quite a rare thing. So we come to know about that. Then his literary interpretations. Then we come to know about his literary fiction, academic tests, then texts and the essays and children books. So quite a wide range. And actually what brought him into superstardom was his novel, The Name of the Rose, which sold more than 10 million copies. So it was beyond expectation that this novel would do so well, but it did well. Okay. Okay. Now, Mukund starts with a statement that the English novelist and academic David Lodge once remarked, "I can't understand how one man can do all the things he, that is Umberto, does. One man can do everything." So he wants to know what did this statement mean. So Umberto says that maybe, people get the impression that I am doing many things, a variety of things. But in the end, basically, I'm always doing the same thing. Now, what did he mean by that? That he has, he tries to explain it, that there is one thing very, very strong about him is that he has philosophical interests. Okay, he has a very, very strong inclination for philosophical interests, and he pursues this philosophical interest in all his written activity, be it fiction or non-fiction, or for children or for novels. Okay, so everything, like even the books that he writes for children, they're about non-violence and peace. So his philosophical interest is there in everything. So people find that he does a variety of things: fiction, non-fiction, novel, children's books. So there's a variety. But he feels that there is no variety. Basically, he's doing one thing only. Why? Because he feels that his philosophical interest, that angle of philosophical interest of his, is can be seen in all his written work. That is what he's trying to say. Okay. Then he talks about basically what is philosophical aspect that we say. Philosophical means, the study about existence. It's a very abstract about existence and about behavior and things like that. Okay. Now, after that, then he gives that explanation. Then he talks about a secret. Umberto Eco talks about a secret. And what is the secret? And this is a very, very strong message for the not only for the readers who will read this, and of course anybody who reads this text. It's very, very important and something very interesting. He says that he has great value for time, and he has great respect for time too. So in fact, he remarks to the interviewer that while I was waiting for you to come and interview me, that little time gap that was there in between, I just did not sit idle. I did something. And in that space, in that time gap, what did Umberto do? He wrote down a complete article. So you can imagine that, each second was utilized by Umberto. And this time gap, or these intervals that he's talking about in between two tasks, or the time that you have in between any task, so that was called interstices. And he called them interstices. So this part, is very, very interesting, and we all must actually take up this, because so many times after finishing one task, then we take a long break, but that it should not be like that. Time should be utilized to the fullest. Instead of just sitting and idling away and waiting for the interview and thinking what he would ask, what he would say, when you don't even know what he's going to ask. So you're so undecided about everything. So, but he utilized that time not thinking about all that, but he actually sat down and he wrote an article. So every second was utilized constructively. Okay. So this part is very, very important, the part about interstices. Okay. Then Mukund says that not everybody can do this, because it's quite an unusual, way of doing things. Okay. So then Mukund asked him that his non-fictional writing and his scholarly work, they had a certain playful and personal quality about it. So then he asked him that, is it a marked departure from a regular academic style, which is invariably depersonalized and often dry and boring? So have you consciously adopted an informal approach, or is it something that just comes naturally to you? That, in certain writings, you deviate, you take a departure, and there is a little bit of your personal self that we can see in that written material. And it is a little change. A departure means a little change, a little deviation from a regular academic style, because the academic style can be, depersonalized, nothing personal about yourself, and it can also be very abstract and dry and boring. So does it come naturally, or do you try to deviate? To this, Umberto Eco answered through an example that he gives, that when he had to put in his research papers, his thesis for when he was doing research in Italy, his professors told him that there were various scholars, they learned a lot on a certain subject, then they made false hypotheses. False means untrue. Hypothesis is assumptions, and then they would make the corrections and they would submit their papers. But Umberto Eco, he did not work on those lines. He actually did a lot of research work, and he followed the policy of trials and errors and then rectification. And when he submitted his papers, finally, his papers also included all his hit and trial methods that he had used, all his trials and errors, and how he had rectified it. So it was a very, very detailed account and a very honest account how he had come to the final conclusion. So he was admired for it, unlike the other scholars who just made, false hypothesis and then they corrected it and then they submitted the papers. So he was about 22 at that time, and it was through this research work that he carried out so honestly by submitting the trials, like, for exams, when you're doing your maths paper, you have to submit the rough sheet also, that kind of a thing. So he also submitted all his rough work and the hit and trial work along, and he was admired for this work of his. And that made him realize and understand that scholarly books should be written in that way, in a detailed way, in a narrative style, okay, by telling the story of the research. And then over here, he remembers another friend of his, that's Roland Barthes, who was always very frustrated because he was an essayist. He used to write essays, but he was actually very fond of writing, of becoming novels, of writing novels, of becoming a novelist. He wanted to do a lot of creative writing, but unfortunately, he could not fulfill his dream because he passed away much before he could even think about fulfilling his dream. Okay, then when they started talking about novels, as the topic started with his friend Roland Barthes, and from there comes up the topic of the novel that actually, pushed him up to superstardom, and that was The Name of the Rose. Then Mukund asked him, talking about novels, from being a famous academic, you went on to becoming a spectacular, famous, novelist, and besides writing all non-fiction and things like that also. So, say about 20 of the non-fiction books. Here, immediately Umberto Eco checks him and corrects him, and he says over 40 of these non-fiction books that he has written. And novels, he has only written about 5 novels. So, I mean, no comparison, 40 books and just 5 novels, So, Mukund was a little taken aback by this, and then he says that, people recognize you as a novelist, and does this kind of thing bother Umberto? So Umberto says, yes, it does bother him because he considers himself to be a university professor. He considers himself to be a part of the academic community. Now, academic community, it is a structure that fosters, creating, sharing knowledge, and, coming together on a very, very academic front kind of a thing. So, both for extra and co-curricular activities and everything, he wanted that academic structure to be prominent. So he does not like to be called a novelist, and he says that he would rather be a part of the academic community than be a part of some pen club where writers come and for creative writing or for writing novels or stories. And he says that he writes novels only on Sundays when he's slightly relaxed and he has a little bit of free time. So he always likes to participate in academic conferences and not these kind of pen clubs, which are there meant for writing. So he prefers to be on the academic front. Okay. Then Mukund asks him the next question, that is about the novel, that the Name of the Rose is a very serious novel. And it is a mixture of, a detective yarn. Yarn is a story that has been spun. So it's a little bit of detective story at one level. Then it also goes deep into metaphysics, theology, and medieval history. Now, deep into metaphysics is abstract philosophy. Okay. Theology is the study of religion, and medieval history is in the everything that happened in the Middle Ages. So it's a mixture of all these things. And the masses really enjoyed this novel. But was it puzzling for Umberto? So Umberto says, no, it was not puzzling for me, but it was a little puzzling for the journalists. They got a little puzzled, and so did the publishers also get puzzled, because journalists and publishers, they feel that, people like trash. Trash means worthless stuff, but means what they're trying to say is not very heavy stuff, which is, some people like to do light reading, and they can't take in some very heavy stuff like about abstract philosophies and things like that. It's not everybody's cup of tea. So, worthless stuff, and they don't like difficult reading. But considering that there are 6 billion people on this planet, and the name of the rose sold between 10 to 15 million copies, okay, but there are 6 billion people. So according to Umberto, it was not a large section of society which actually read the novel, okay. So that's what he feels, and he feels that that section, that of people who read the novel and who liked it, this about 10 to 15 million copies that were sold, maybe they liked that kind of difficult stuff. They did not want the easy stuff, so they considered themselves well made for that kind of a novel. And how does he try to bring out this is that he also, after dinner, he wants to relax a little bit. So what does he do after dinner, at 9 p.m. after dinner? He watches television, and he watches Miami Vice or The Emergency Room. Now, Miami Vice it was an American drama series which was telecast between 1984 to 1990. And above 90% viewership was there for this drama series. Then Emergency Room is a medical drama series which was telecast from 1994 to 2009. So he says that even after dinner, when he wants to relax, so he wants to watch something light, not something that is very heavy and burdensome, and it takes your peace away at that time. So just for entertainment, light, light viewing, he watched these two series. Okay. Then Mukund asked him that, do you think the huge success of the novel has nothing to do with the fact that it was written during the medieval history? Do you think it's because of the medieval history that the novel, got so much of viewing, or so much of, so many copies were sold? So Umberto Eco says that's possible, but not to a great extent, because lots and lots of books are written on Middle history, But his idea, his answer is that whatever he wrote, he wrote it like in a story form, in a narrative style, just like a Chinese wise man tells stories in great detail, arousing the interest of the listeners. So he actually used that method. So maybe the people actually liked his narrative style, because his publisher also, who liked his books, but she also had, thought that only about 3,000 copies in the country would be sold, not more than that. So they gave an advance for 3,000 copies, but in the end, it sold 2 or 3 million in the USA, So actually, he attributes the success of the novel to, nothing in particular. He says maybe, it's a kind of a mystery, and maybe only one reason that he gives is the correct timing for the novel. That time could be the only thing that went in favor, that, that time was right, the book was right, and everything fell into place, and he says that maybe if he had written the book 10 years earlier or 10 years later, maybe it wouldn't have got so much of a good response. So he attributes everything to time and says that actually it's a mystery. Okay, so with that we come to the end of the chapter, and now I'd like to do a few question and answers. Before that, we go on to the theme. So the theme of the chapter, the writer talks about the benefits or the usefulness or the utility of interviews, and there are varied views on interviews. Some consider it to be a source of truth, and practice makes it a great art, and some despise it and condemn it and loathe it because they feel that it is an unwarranted intrusion into their lives. And most of the celebrities like V.S. Naipaul, Lewis Carroll, Rudyard Kipling, and Saul Bellow, they have all despised the interview. And the second part of the chapter is an interview of Umberto Eco by Mukund Padmanabhan. Okay, and the style of the chapter, it is divided into two parts, as I just told you. Okay, what the first part deals with and what the second part deals with. Okay, now we come on to the question and answers. What are some of the positive views on interviews? Some people make extravagant claims, for the interview being a source of truth and practice making it an art. And some think that it gives the people a peep into their life and personality, of the people who are interviewed. And it enables us to know everything about the celebrity. These are the positive views, okay? Why do some celebrity writers hate to be interviewed? Again, it's the same thing. They hate to be interviewed because they find the whole experience very horrifying, suffocating, with a lot of stress and a lot of pressure. And they feel that there is unwarranted intrusion into their lives. And they think that it diminishes them. And writers like Lewis Carroll hate to be flattered, to be lionized as such and to be blown out of proportion. Okay. So, and Rudyard Kipling thinks it's an immoral and an attack on the person, and the interviewee is a victim. Okay, what is the belief in some primitive? Primitive is old, ancient cultures about being photographed. The belief in some of the primitive cultures about being photographed, of taking a photographic portrait of somebody, it is like stealing the person's soul, the deep within you, what you have. And the person who is photographed loses a part of himself, something very dear to you, something very close to your heart, and something, if you have to make it public, obviously you feel very low, you feel diminished, and you feel a part of you has gone away. It's like stealing the person's soul. And without a soul, a body is useless. Okay. Okay, what do you understand by the expression thumbprints on the windpipe? So Saul Bellow, he felt that, he described these interviews as being thumbprints on his windpipe. It means that the interviewer, feels a sense of suffocation, and when he's interviewed, and he says it builds up so much tension and pressure that he feels that there are thumbprints on his windpipe. Not very comfortable, and it's very unpleasant and a very nasty feeling, and you feel that you're choking, you're suffocated, and you're about to land, or your life is about to go. Who in today's world is our chief source of information about personalities? Of course, our chief source of information about personalities today is the interview. The interviewer enables us to know everything about the interviewee. Because of this, the interviewer holds a very prominent and a very important, position, and has a lot of power and influence. As I told you, that media is an autonomous body, and they can put across any kind of questions and, seek answers to them, seek clarifications from people, from politicians, from, various other agencies that they are dealing with. Okay. What types of television programs does Umberto Eco watch after dinner? He watches very light programs like Miami Vice or Emergency Room, which was, drama series which were telecast, and they were purely for entertainment. Okay, and during the day, such programs don't, interest him at all. It is only at night when he wants to relax and for entertainment. Okay. What opinion does the author hold about the interview? The author feels that the interview has become a commonplace of journalism today, and it is a great serviceable medium of communication. And it helps us to form impressions of both the interviewer and the interviewee, because the dignity that is maintained by the person asking questions and the dignity that is maintained by the person answering the questions, it reveals a great deal about both of them, how they speak and how they answer and how they question. So, keeping each other, respect for each other and the way they portray these questions. Okay. All right. Next question. Umberto Eco does many things but says, I'm always doing the same thing, but that is more difficult to explain. What does he mean to say? You know, because as I told you that Umberto Eco says that he has one basic main interest, and that is philosophical interest. And that reflects in all his writings, whether it is fictional, it is non-fictional, or it is, you know, for children that he's writing. But that one basic thing remains the same. So people feel that he writes for so, I mean, you know, for so many genres that he writes, you know, and so he's doing a lot of things. But he thinks that his work, his writing or his creativity or his written work, all has a basic foundation of philosophical interest. So he feels that he's just doing one thing. What are interstices? How are these used by Umberto Eco? Now, interstices are those empty spaces or the time gap or the intervals, you know, during which a person is usually not doing anything. But Umberto Eco utilizes this time very, very constructively, and he uses these time gaps or these interstices to do his writing work. And that's what he tells the interviewer, that he, while waiting for him to arrive, he had finished an article. Okay. How is Umberto Eco's non-fictional writing style different from academic writing style? Umberto Eco's non-fictional writing style has a certain, you know, a little playful and a personal quality about it, whereas his academic writing style is depersonalized and often dry and boring. Did Umberto consider himself a novelist first or an academic scholar? How do you say so? Umberto says that he associates himself more with scholars than novelists, and he became a novelist only by chance, and he only writes novels on a Sunday, and that also he began writing this novel at the age of 50. So he considers himself to be a professor first, and he likes to associate himself with the academic community. Okay. What reason does Umberto Eco give to the success of his novel, The Name of the Rose? Well, Umberto Eco, you know, the interviewer had many things, that maybe it was because it was written in the medieval, you know, in the medieval period. That is why people liked it so much. And he gave various other reasons. But actually, Umberto Eco also, he says that he really does not know where the success, you know, actually lies, because he felt that maybe at that point of time, you know, the time factor was the major thing which brought about the success of the novel, The Name of the Rose. The time was just right. The time was perfect for the novel, its setting, for everything. And perhaps that, because otherwise, besides that, it is a mystery that why, you know, so many copies were sold. And he just attributes the success due to right timing. Comment on Umberto Eco's novel, The Name of the Rose. The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco is basically, it is a detective novel, and it deals with metaphysics, abstract philosophy, then theology, that's religion, and the medieval history. Yet it has mass appeal. And though it is a serious novel, the mass appeal has puzzled the journalists and the publishers as to why this novel was, you know, liked so much. Okay. What impression do you form of Umberto Eco? He's basically a university professor. He's a famous novelist. He's a large-hearted and a genial person who likes to be interviewed. The very fact that we've read his interview. He's very candid and bold in his answers. He reveals the secret of his success, and he pursues his philosophical interests in every kind of writing. Okay, and he wants to be called an academician who is a part-time novelist, and not be known as a novelist first, no, because he liked to be associated with the academic community. What opinion do you form of Mukund Padmanabhan, the one who took the interview? He's an intelligent interviewer who does, and he did not ask any kind of embarrassing questions to Ambarito, and he has come fully prepared to interview a celebrity. And he's candid and bold in asking questions, and like I said earlier, maintain the dignity, and in a very dignified manner, he asked the questions and was very proper and correct in his mannerisms and in whatever he asked. I think that is all. I hope the chapter is clear and the question and answers will help you understand it better. Thank you very much for watching. God bless you all.